Hey everyone, Charlene Ortiz here. Today we're finally going to discuss the topic of epigenetics. This has been a video I've been very excited to do. It's taken me a little bit longer to prepare for than what I had anticipated, but that's typical for most things in my life anyways. But anyway, I've really been looking forward to doing this video because once I explain the science to you and what it means for you and for me, you will realize that this is a groundbreaking discovery that could completely change our lives and completely change our perception of our bodies and how much control we really have over our own health and our bodies, especially when it comes to disease. And so first I'm going to start with the definition of epigenetics. And epigenetics is the study of cellular and physiological traits or external and environmental factors that turn our genes on or off and define how our cells actually read the genes. This definition I got from the website of Bruce Lipton, and Bruce Lipton is the man that I'm going to be putting the emphasis of this video on today. Everything I'm going to be talking about today is basically information that I'm consolidating into a video that I'm going to try to make 30 minutes. From hours and hours of lectures that I have heard from this man. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about Bruce Lipton and who he is. Bruce Lipton is a PhD cell biologist, and he started his studies at CW Post Campus of Long Island University, where he received his Bachelor's of Arts in 1966. And then from there he went on to the University of Virginia, where he received his PhD in developmental biology in 1971. From there, he went to the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, where he taught anatomy from 1973 to 1982. And then from there, he went to St. George University, and he taught anatomy for 3 years. And then from there, he went to Penn State and Stanford University, where he taught there for 5 years, from 1987 to 1992. Where he researched biology and genetics. And then after he left Stanford University and went on to write The Biology of Belief. And as I talk about his research and the things that he's discovered, you'll see in the course of time, throughout the time period when he was at St. George University and Stanford University, how the discoveries that he made and how he decided to go off on his own and continue his research, and then went to write The Biology of Belief. And he's written other books since then, a lot of different publications and journals, but he's certainly a pioneer in this field and is somebody that I have an incredible amount of respect for. There are very, very few people in this world that I would say I would be honored to meet. Bruce Lipton is one of them. There is not one celebrity or any famous person or author or very, very few people that I could say I would be honored to meet them. Well, first of all, I think most celebrities are self-absorbed, and I can't think of one that I would really feel honored to meet. But for myself personally, I am inspired and I admire the people that have actually made a contribution to this world and life-changing discoveries to help improve humanity. And he is a man that definitely fits those characteristics. And his research, again, has exposed groundbreaking scientific evidence in our ability to heal ourselves. And should we adopt his research, should the medical community adopt his research, and not just his research, there's a lot of other scientists and a lot of other publications and journals that have done a lot of study in the field of epigenetics, but should the medical community adopt the concept of epigenetics, the pharmaceutical companies would most likely go out of business. And so that, again, is another reason why the medical community doesn't adopt this field of study. Most doctors don't even know it exists. I asked my doctor when I first discovered epigenetics, when I first discovered what it was 9 months ago, I asked him if he knew what it was, and he said no, he'd never heard of it. And that was kind of shocking to me, considering how incredible the discoveries in epigenetics are, and how life-changing that they could be for millions of people that suffer from disease, especially chronic illness. But again, it's just not something that the mainstream science, mainstream media, or medical community just want to embrace right now. And hopefully that's going to change. And so everything that I talk about again today is just going to be my best efforts to try to consolidate a lot of the information that I've learned by listening to this man over the past 9 months. So, okay, first we're going to talk about what he discovered. And I'm going to have to erase all this. And when he was studying at, I don't know if it was St. George University or University of Wisconsin, I don't know which one in particular, he went on to do he started doing a lot of his own studies with multipotential stem cells. And I want to talk about what he discovered first. And so basically what he did is he took several groups of multipotential stem cells and he put them into different environments and to see what would happen. And so he would put, one group in one environment, one group in another, and a third in a different, but they would all be different environments, but they all had the same exact genetics. The cells had the same exact genetics. And so as he put the cells into different environments, they would turn into different types of tissue, like muscle tissue, maybe cardiac tissue, or skeletal muscle, because cardiac and skeletal, they both have muscle tissue, but they're different types of muscle tissue. And let's say bone tissue. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but let's just say those are the different types of tissues that were developed. So what he initially discovered with this experiment is that the genetics of the cell have nothing to do with their development. It is instead the environment that the cells are placed in that will determine how that cell will develop. And again, this was a very groundbreaking discovery that he had made, and this was back in 1977. Well, he published an article on this, and he presented it to his peers at the university that he worked at, that he studied at, and they rejected it. And so he left that university that he had tenure in, by the way, which gives you a very secure position at a very good university, which means a really great job for probably the rest of your life. He left that security and went on to Stanford University, where he continued to do more experimentation and was able to use more sophisticated technology, I guess, in order to do his experimentation. And again, through this research, was able to prove that cells were affected by their environment. And there's more that goes into that I'm going to get into here in a second. And as he presented his information to his peers at Stanford University, they once again rejected it. And he was published in a magazine called Differentiation, which is a scientific magazine. So his work was published in that paper. And he left Stanford University because as far as he was concerned, they were not interested in studying science. They were just interested in staying with the mainstream, where he, in turn, was interested in new discoveries and actual scientific evidence. And so he left Stanford University and went on to write Biology of Belief. And so first, let's talk about the beginnings of all this and how it all starts. And so he talks about in his lecture, at least one of my favorite lectures of his, although I love all of his lectures. He talks about the different philosophers. He talks about Democritus and Socrates. Okay, and he talks about how Democritus saw just the physical, material world, that all of life is just physical, it's material, And he's actually the one that discovered the atom. And that at that time, that was the smallest particle that existed, nothing smaller than that. Now we know that there's protons and electrons, and now even string theory exists now. And so Socrates also believed in the physical and spiritual and or mental, that, you know, that there was something greater than us, greater than the physical world, and that our thoughts, our mental capacity affected us physically. So Socrates believed that there was something greater, God, energy, but something spiritual. And so over the years, over the hundreds and hundreds of years since these men have existed, and Isaac Newton started doing his research, and he discovered gravity. We all know about Isaac Newton, that the apple fell from the tree. Well, anyway, Isaac Newton developed a form of mathematics where he was able to predict the rotation of the planets and all that stuff. And so Isaac Newton, from Isaac Newton's discovery came Newtonian physics. So Newtonian physics is basically the physics of the physical world. The same things that the Democritus believed. And so, that again, it's just the world is a material world that consists of particles, and there is no God, nothing, nothing spiritual, nothing greater than that is involved with that. It's just what we see, just strictly the material world, and that atoms interact, particles interact with each other. That there's no waves, there's no nothing. It's just the physical. That's it. And so the Newtonian physics, the scientific model, or they call it the scientific pyramid, the base of that is mathematics. And then on top of that is physics, then chemistry, and then biology on top of that. And then the tip of the pyramid would be psychology. And that's basically what, you know, the medical community and most of science has been based on. The science that we all studied in elementary school and high school, maybe even some college, it's all based on Newtonian physics, and that's what all of our research has been based on for hundreds of years. Well, back in 1925, they started doing more study on quantum physics. And quantum physics has to do more with waves and energy and frequency, vibration. Nikola Tesla was somebody who was a very strong believer in quantum physics. Even Albert Einstein once quoted that the field is the primary governing agent of the particle, and the field are basically waves, frequency. So when I say waves, I mean the things that we can't see that makes things possible. It's like, for example, light. When you turn on the light, there are photons or those types of waves that make it possible for us to see the light, but you can't see the waves as they travel from when you turn on the switch to the light bulb. You can't see those waves. Another one would be radio frequency, sound waves. You can hear the voice on the radio, but you can't see the frequency. You cannot see the waves, the sound waves that are coming from the radio. And so you know it's there, you know it exists, but you can't see the invisible forces that are allowing that to exist. And so in 1925, they started really studying quantum physics, although I believe the first person that discovered quantum physics was in 1888. And the scientist's name was something Bohr. I can't remember his first name, but something Bohr. So anyway, they decided to, and I'm going to put actually a link in the description below to where you can find the website where you can find articles where they did this research and what they discovered. Now, interestingly enough, Albert Einstein was not really that excited about this. He wasn't really ready to jump on the bandwagon and accept quantum physics, you know, to be true, or quantum physics to be the foundation, for all of science. He definitely wasn't ready to accept that. And some of physics, such as a concept called entanglement, which I'm going to talk about in a second, he called it spooky science or spooky physics. And he even quoted at one time, I can't remember the direct quote, where he said that he wants to believe that everything is particle-based, but because of discoveries in quantum physics and what they're learning, like, he can't completely believe that. So he didn't really accept it, he didn't really reject it, but he could see that obviously there were a lot of aspects of it that were true. And so, but Albert Einstein was actually involved in the studies they did from 1925 to 1927. I believe it was Copenhagen, where he was involved in those studies. And so anyway, that's when they really started to study a lot more about quantum physics and what it was about and how it acted. So, okay, so we're all made of atoms, right? And atoms, they vibrate. And so any of us that took any type of basic biology, we learned about atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons. And we learned that when atoms vibrate really, really fast, that produces heat. When they vibrate slow, like an ice cube or something, the atoms are going to be vibrating very, very slow. And so we know that the atoms move, that they do vibrate. Well, when the atoms vibrate, they produce waves. And the waves will produce frequencies. Again, the same way like when you listen to a radio, you can turn to different frequencies. You can go to frequency 91.9 and that's rock. And then you can turn the frequency to 103.5 and that's going to be classical. And so we understand how frequencies work through radios or CB radios that truck drivers use. Different frequencies, different channels or different frequencies, they can hear other people or what have you. Okay, so we do know what frequencies are. We do know that they exist and how they work. Well, we also have a frequency, and we also have an electrical signal. And so because our atoms, they are electrically charged. And so for those of you that watched my video on how exercise can help you overcome addiction, the first part, and when I talked about an action potential, and I briefly discussed the sodium-potassium pump and how the sodium-potassium pump is what produces the energy for an action potential. Well, basically, in the cell, the cell has to get from a negative charge to a positive charge in order to produce that action potential. And that happens by potassium and sodium moving in and out of the cell. I'm not going to get too much into that, but the cell has to go from negative 70 millivolts to positive 30 millivolts in order to produce the action potential. And so again, our bodies work on an electrical charge. And an electrical charge has an electromagnetic field. And so thus, what is around us is affected by an electromagnetic field. Okay? So when an atom vibrates, it produces a wave. And so when the waves meet, that is called entanglement. And that is what Albert Einstein considered to be spooky physics or spooky science. And the reason is because what they discovered is that if you have one particle and you put another particle 4 miles away, 100 miles away, wherever, and you manipulate and do something to what this particle, the other particle will be affected immediately, which means that they somehow affect each other, and that is a concept called entanglement. Now, this concept is studied by an institute called the Institute of Noetics, and Dean Radin is a scientist that works there. And a great example of this is 9/11, where at the Institute of Noetics, one experiment that they do, because they study a lot about entanglement and psychic abilities and telepathic abilities, not necessarily like psychics, but just concepts like, have you ever been hanging out with your friend or a family member or what have you, and you're thinking about something, and then they say something like, oh my God, I was just thinking about the same thing. You know, that's kind of what they're talking about. Like how did you know? How did you know that? Or say they're at the grocery store and you really want chocolate ice cream, but you never eat it. And for some reason that day they decided to buy chocolate ice cream. You know, oh my God, how did you know I wanted that? Like that's what they study, like that process. What's the science behind that? Why do we have that ability to communicate with each other in a way that's that's remote, you know, that's non-physical? And so they basically have what's called eggs that are placed around the world that measure frequencies, the wavelengths that we emit through our thoughts. And it goes so much more in depth than that, but I'm trying to simplify. So on 9/11, the readings that they got from these eggs were just absolutely mind-boggling, because the emotions of the whole world were so much in the same wavelength, the same frequency of what had happened to the people in New York at 9/11. And they just couldn't believe the impact, the readings that they were getting on these eggs. And I will put a link in the description below to a video that talks about that. It's really fascinating when you watch this, you know, like how the emotions of the whole world were just kind of entangled and just together. And but it's incredibly fascinating science. So anyway, not to get too much off track. So whenever we, so basically what our thought process is, or the actions or the thoughts that we have, can affect somebody else that's far away, especially if we have a very close connection to that person. Okay, and so when the waves interact, it's called interference. Well, they'll kind of cancel each other out. Well, not necessarily cancel each other out. It depends on the type of interference. But when the waves connect to each other, it's called an interference. And so there are two types of interference. The first one is called constructive, and constructive is what you would consider like good vibes. And so constructive interference is like, say you're not feeling too well, you're kind of in a bad mood, and a good friend of yours comes over and has a really great attitude, a lot of great energy, and really good vibes, and is kind of on the same wavelength that you're in. You know, you have the same world views, the same outlook on life, whatever. And, you know, she comes over and you just feel so much better. You know, you feel energized, you know, after she leaves, and you just feel great. That would be constructive interference, where the energy was increased. And so it magnified, it multiplied. Destructive interference would be where if you are with somebody who is on a different wavelength. So say you're in a good mood and you go see someone or have a conversation with someone who's really depressed, who's really negative, and it brings you down, it sucks the energy out of you. So you kind of cancel each other out. And so that would be destructive interference, because you're on different wavelengths, different frequencies, okay? And so that's basically how wavelengths work. That's how our energy works, all right? And so, okay, so once we understand how wavelengths and how frequency works, we can kind of understand why epigenetics works the way that it does, all right? So, one thing that researchers have discovered, I believe it was 5 months after Bruce Lipton wrote his publication, Biology of Belief, a scientific magazine called Nature actually published an article saying that that our stem cells are affected by the environment. And again, he was like, "Well, I was already saying that, you know, 5 months ago, you know, and now they're just publishing an article about this." Okay, now we're going to talk about exactly how the cells work. And I actually had to stop filming for a second because my dog was bothering me. She's been a little sick, she had to go out, but anyway, so I'm going to try to pick up where I left off. And I think I was talking about how Nature magazine had produced an article that stem cells are affected by the environment, where Bruce Lipton had 5 months after he published his book, where he had been studying that for years already. So, all right, so now I'm going to pick up from there. So now we're going to talk about how the cells work, okay, in relation to frequency and all that stuff, okay, in our environment. So basically, we all have 20 different amino acids that make up the shapes of proteins. And our body has 150,000 different proteins. And this was discovered by two scientists named Watson and Crick. I believe it was in 1955. They did research on DNA, and they discovered that we had 150,000 proteins. And so we have 20 different amino acids that have different shapes, and each protein has a backbone. And again, every backbone has a different shape to it, okay? And so the signal that comes from the environment is what determines what the shape of that protein will be. All right, and so first I'm going to talk about the cell and the nucleus and the discovery that they made about the nucleus. For most of us that studied any type of biology or chemistry in school, we learned that the nucleus is the brain of the cell. That the nucleus is what tells the cell what to do. It's like the control center of the cell. Well, they discovered that if you remove the nucleus from the cell can go on to live for several more months. But the cell cannot reproduce. So, is the nucleus really the brain of the cell? Or is it more responsible for the reproductive nature of the cell? And so, if the cell can go on for a few months without the nucleus, certainly the nucleus cannot be responsible for the life of the cell, for the functioning of the cell, but merely the reproduction of the cell. What they did discover is that the membrane of the cell is what is responsible for how the cell functions, for the functioning of the cell, which is the outer layer of the cell. And being that the cell is a microscopic replica of our full human body, then that would mean that for us, that our skin would determine the signal that comes into our bodies and how we're going to respond to that signal, how it's going to affect the shape and the function of a protein. Okay, so I'm going to try to explain this and simplify this so it makes sense. So, okay, so we have the cell. Okay, this is the cell membrane. Oh, let me see my ink here. All right, so this is the cell membrane, okay? And on the cell membrane, we have a receptor. And then we have the effector. All right, and then the signal comes from the environment and communicates with the receptor, which then sends it to the processor protein. And you don't have to know exactly what any of this stuff is. It's just important to know what the process is, how the process works. This will then communicate with the effector, which will and then send a secondary signal, because the first signal, this one right here, is the primary signal. And the secondary signal will then communicate with the protein and determine what that protein's pathway will be, which could be respiratory, digestive, whatever different systems our body has. It will then determine what the pathway will be and what the shape of the protein will be. So in the magazine Nature, an article in Nature magazine, which is a scientific magazine, they discovered that quantum physics was able to predict the shape that the protein will be when it interacts with the signal. Newtonian physics cannot predict that. So quantum physics, again, is waves and frequency, not material physical particle. So it is the waves and the frequency that will, again, be able to predict how the signal will affect the protein. And then an article in a scientific magazine determined that proteins are affected by vibrations. And in his lecture, with the link that I provide, in that 2.5-hour lecture, he shows you the articles and all that stuff. And so, So you can see, you know, where he got those resources from. Okay, so one question they had was, what causes disease? Is it the signal or is it the protein? And so being that when it comes to birth defects, when it comes to any type of genetic birth defect that affects the protein, less than 5% of the population is affected by some sort of birth defect. Less than 5% affects the protein. So the protein has nothing to do with it as far as the myriad of different diseases that we suffer from today. Autoimmune diseases, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, whatever it is. Unless it was a birth defect we had when we were born, because the protein was mutated during gestation in some way. When we were in the womb, for some reason our proteins were mutated and we were born with some kind of a defect. Unless that was the case, we were all born with healthy, perfectly functioning, normal bodies where the proteins were functioning normally. So if the proteins were normal and we weren't part of that less than 5%, is disease caused by the protein? And the answer is no. Disease is caused by the signal. So, what is responsible for the signal? What is the signal? The signal comes from the environment. And the membrane of the cell determines whether or not the signal is going to be allowed in. The membrane is what determines that, okay? So if the membrane of the cell is the covering of the cell, for us it would be our skin, okay? So, and the receptor would be the parts of our body that are responsible for reception, like our senses, how we receive signals from our environment, our hearing, our taste, our sight, our smell, our touch. Those are our receptors, and how we perceive how we perceive those signals from our outer receptors is what will affect the shape, the action, the behavior of the protein. Okay? And so, all right, so when it comes to the how we see the world and how is it related to this right here. All right, so the protein that, again, is responsible for how the signal is going to function is called the receptor. I hope I remember the whole name. Receptor, effector, integral, membrane protein complex. I think that's what it is. I could be wrong. But if you watch the video, if you watch the Bruce Lipton video, he'll tell you the full name. And so anyway, that is the full name of the protein. Okay, it's a very long name. So the definition of what the receptor does is the awareness of the environment. Okay? Sorry, I ran out of room here. And the effector is the physical sensation. All right, so the definition of that long protein would be, and that protein, again, is what determines the action of the signal and its response to how it will affect the protein, okay? So it would be defined as the awareness of our environment through physical sensation, okay? Then he makes a correlation in his lecture between the definition of that long-ass name protein and the definition of perception, which is the awareness of the environment and its effects on physical sensation. Okay? And he shows the dictionary, the definition in the dictionary of perception. He shows it on the screen. And so, again, the definition of the receptor, effector, integral, blah, 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 protein is the awareness of the environment through physical sensation. Okay, and the effector is what actually sends the physical, is what tells the protein what to physically do through the secondary signal. The receptor takes in the signal from the environment and then tells that awareness, that signal we got from the environment. The effector then sends a signal and physically tells the protein what to do from that signal. Okay, so then perception is the awareness of our environment and its effects through physical sensation. So perception and the definition of that long-ass protein is the same. So what affects the shape of the behavior of that protein, how that protein will behave? What affects it? The environment, not our genes. And then he has this really great video demonstration where he's showing how how our DNA strand is covered by a protein sleeve, and then when the protein sleeve is removed, then they can access the DNA, which they can take the genetic code, again, which determines what color eyes you'll be, how tall you'll be, what skin tone you'll have, are you gonna be bald at 40 or are you not, stuff like that. So that's kind of our genetics, all right, that's the genetic code. And so he kind of shows in the video how the protein sleeve is removed, and the signal attaches to the protein sleeve, removes it, therefore it releases the genetic code. But the DNA itself doesn't do anything, it does nothing. And so the analogy that he uses is like a blueprint, how DNA is just a blueprint, and basically how we're going to develop. Like when I was born, I got my mom and dad's DNA. My mom's Guatemalan, my dad's German. My mom's really little, so I didn't grow up to be very tall. I got her brown eyes, her brown hair, her brown skin, and I'm not very tall. And so I got her DNA in that aspect, and I got my father's DNA, the German side, where I have features that are a little different than the Guatemalan side. That's my DNA. That's my genetic code. There's really nothing I can do to change that. Okay? And so, but the DNA itself does not affect the action of the proteins when it comes to disease, because again, the shape of the protein, the behavior of the protein is what will determine whether or not we have disease. Okay? And so the signal is what will affect the shape of the protein. On whether or not the protein, again, will produce disease or will produce health. The signal determines that. And the signal is controlled by our perception. So how we see the world, basically. What we think about. What was taught to us at a very young age when we were children by our parents, by our teachers, by whatever authority figures. And he goes on to talk about our subconscious, and that's definitely something that I'm going to do another video on, is basically the subconscious. And again, it's going to be based on Bruce Lipton and a lot of the research that he's done. And so I'm going to talk about that, and basically becoming conscious of your subconscious and how our subconscious affects our life. And a lot of the research that's gone into that, which not only by him, but there's so many other scientists and other organizations that have done a lot of research on our subconscious. And so our perception is based on basically how we were taught to see the world. For example, I was raised that success has to do with money. And I think probably 99% of us were raised like that. That not just by our parents, but by maybe our teachers, the media, what we see on TV, that if you're not wealthy and good looking and have a nice car and something to be proud of, that you're not successful. where really that's not the case. Being a trainer for the past 20 years, most of the people I work with are wealthy because the services I provide are not cheap, they're expensive. And I can promise you that wealth does not equal success. I met some of the most depressed and unhappiest people in my field of work that were very wealthy. So I know that that is not an indicator of success. Money's great, don't get me wrong, I love money, I think it's wonderful. It can obviously do a lot of great things, but it really is not the ultimate determinant of whether or not you've been successful in life. But if that is our perception, then the way that if we don't have money and we don't have nice things and something to show off, we will feel that we're not successful. And so the same is true when it comes to disease. If we say you grow up in a family where there's breast cancer, or there's some sort of cancer that runs very rampant in your family. Almost everybody's had it. A lot of people have died from it. And so therefore you were taught by your family, your medical doctor, that the likelihood that you'll get this cancer is very high. Like, you know, breast cancer. I think I mentioned before, like breast cancer. You know, that if you have breast cancer in your mom and your aunt and your grandma, the chances of you having it are very high. And so some people will even get a double mastectomy because of that. Well, according to epigenetics, that's not the case. That your belief in the fact that you can get this cancer is what will give you the cancer, not the genes, because the genes do not control us. We control the genes through our perception. And again, because we emit certain waves, certain frequencies, we can manipulate the protein in a good or a bad way to either be mutant or to be healthy. And so another great example that he talks about is a research that they did on mice. And again, he puts the sources and all that stuff in the lecture, where they took a mouse, two mice with the same mutant genes. One of them was blonde, fat, had diabetes, and the other one was perfectly healthy. And so basically the way that they were able to manipulate the genes of the mice, or the outcome of the mice's health, was certain additives they gave to one mouse where the other mouse did not have those additives. So they were able to actually manipulate the genes so that this mouse grew up to be healthy. They did the same thing with another set of mice where one mouse had a mutant gene where it had a bent tail, and the mutant gene and then they had another mouse, same exact genetics, but they were mutant genes, and the other mouse was completely normal. Well, the mutant gene in the mouse that had the crooked tail was responsible for spina bifida. And again, through manipulating what they fed the mouse and certain additives, they were able to make the mutant gene into a normal, healthy gene. The opposite can also be done. You could have a normal, healthy gene, and through your beliefs and through your perception, you can make it can become a mutant gene that will cause disease, as well as our environment. And so there are three things that will affect a good, healthy signal. The first one is trauma, like being in a car accident, any type of, you know, tragic accident or what have you, anything that was like out of our control. Another thing would be toxins in our body, you know, any toxic chemicals that we breathe in, like people that were breathing in asbestos, you know, for decades, and then they got mesothelioma, they got cancer. The third one they discovered was thoughts. And the thoughts is the one, in my opinion, that is the most powerful. And this is why. Because they did, I'm going to give a couple examples. The first one is going to be a Southern Baptist church or religion that he talks about in his lecture. And a group of scientists did some studies on this group. And they were very, very devout, incredibly strong faith in God. And they believed that if they got bit by, I believe it was rattlesnakes, if they got bit by rattlesnakes, that God would protect them from the poison of the rattlesnakes and they would not die. Some of them would even drink the strychnine, the poison. They would even drink it. And it had no effect. And he shows the article. He shows the article that was published on this. And so if I remember, I'll try to find out where they are and put the links. I'll try to remember to do that, but it's a lot of articles, but I'll try to make it easier for you guys to find this information so you can read it for yourself. But it had no impact on these people whatsoever. And so, and the reason why I bring that up is because I've heard some people on YouTube talk about epigenetics, and I've heard some people say, well, epigenetics is about what you eat. Well, if people can drink strychnine and not be affected by it, is it really about what you eat? Not that what you eat isn't important, it is important, but it's not about what you eat. I just, all this information I just gave to you within the last, 45 minutes, it's not about what you eat. It's about your belief, it's about the signal, and it's about how the signal affects the shape of the protein. And so another example, and some of you are going to be shocked when you hear this, is that they have discovered that Prozac is just as effective as a sugar pill. And that I am definitely going to link articles to you for. And they also discovered that there's other antidepressant medications that are simply a sugar pill. So for those of you that have been taking Prozac, or you know someone that has been taking Prozac and they say, oh my God, my life is so much better, it's helped me so much, it's a sugar pill. It was their belief in the medication that changed them, not the medication. And we've all heard of the placebo effect. All of us have, where we think that something is going to help us that's totally benign. Like there's nothing to it. It's just a sugar pill or anything like prayer or what have you, meditation, whatever it is. If you really, really believe that this is going to help and change something in a positive way, then it will have a positive impact because you believe that it will, because somebody told you and convinced you that it would. Another concept he talks about is the nocebo effect, when something that is not harmful to us affects us in a negative way when it's not harmful to us, but for whatever reason people have been telling us for years that it is. And so a great example is my family, and especially my grandparents. My grandpa, he's gonna be 98 this year, and he has eaten the most unhealthy diet pretty much most people I've ever known. He's never drank, never smoked. A very religious, very devout man. And he's 98, or he's going to be 98, and never exercised, always ate meat, dairy, everything, stuff loaded with fat, sugar, whatever. Not one health problem to complain about. Not one. He's slowed down over the years, and he's starting to get a little dementia, but he's still quite coherent. And never had any. The rest of my family is the same way. They're all incredibly healthy and they live forever. And that's both sides of my family, And so that's why, when people talk about certain diet plans, oh, this causes cancer, this is better for you, that's, is that really the case? There's so many other factors involved, to really say for sure. And so, again, the fact that that people believe that certain things will harm you, the belief could be what actually causes that to harm us, even though in reality it doesn't have to harm us. But again, we can really get in depth about that and discuss, debate, whatever. But the point is that with epigenetics, we can control the impact the environment will have on us and have on our health. And so the problem with epigenetics is that if people embrace this idea and they really understand how groundbreaking the science is, and they really start to implement certain changes in their life in order to start to heal themselves, like meditation, changing your thought process, just taking better care of yourself, what have you, and really truly believe that in their ability to manipulate their genes, the pharmaceutical companies will go out of business because nobody will need medication anymore. Again, the medical community just doesn't really know about epigenetics yet. And so, again, that's why they don't teach it. They don't, like when you go into your doctor's office and say, you know, haven't been feeling well, I've been depressed or really anxious, or I've been having problems breathing or whatever, and they discover that you have high cholesterol or diabetes or what have you, what do? They immediately give you some kind of medication. They don't ask you, well, what's going on in your life? What kind of environment are you surrounded in? You know, what is your thought process like? And that all has to do with how we were raised, like the different beliefs that we were raised with, that our parents taught us, that our teachers taught us, religion taught us. Because the thing with Bruce Lipton and a lot of these scientists like Dean Radin, who I mentioned earlier, another one named Greg Braden, I'm going to do a video on him and get a little bit more into the physics, because he talks a little bit more about the physics. They're not religious at all. They have very strong spiritual beliefs, but they do not believe in religion. They're actually anti-religion. I think Dean Radin is actually agnostic, because again, it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with scientific evidence and what science has discovered about epigenetics, and about how, again, epigenetics, how it affects us physically. And so, but yeah, so that's basically what this whole, you know, science is about, is your ability to heal yourself and your ability to improve your health through what you believe. Now, that is a kind of a very loaded amount of information, where it sounds great and wonderful, but what do I do? How do I change what I believe? How do I start implementing some of these practices that have to do with epigenetics? And that's why, again, I'm going to be doing videos on meditation. I'm going to do a video on the subconscious, how to become conscious of your subconscious, how to change your thought process, and all those good things. Again, along with exercise and eating healthy, because my motto for my business is more than a workout, a better quality of life. That's my motto, because it really does have to do with every aspect of your life. It's not just about what you eat and whether or not you exercise. Your health, your physical and your mental health, goes so much deeper than that. And that's why at the end of my videos I always say protect yourself physically and emotionally, because emotionally you need to protect yourself as well, by how you absorb other people's energy, by the environment you put yourself in, by the people that you interact with, even by what you watch on TV. My video, the No TV for 24-Hour Challenge, if you haven't watched that, I encourage you to take a second. It's a short video, very short. You know, what we watch on TV, what the music we listen to, it all has an impact on our subconscious and our beliefs, on our perception, and our perception therefore has an impact on the signal, which therefore has an impact on the protein and the shape of the protein, how the protein will behave, whether it will be healthy or whether it will create disease. And so again, it goes so much more in depth, you know, than just simple exercise and eating healthy. So, all right, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I was really trying to consolidate a lot of information to a shorter video, which was tough to do, because again, this guy is such a genius and he's filled with so much information. So I'm going to put a lot of links in the description below, so that you can continue to further research this on this own, which I encourage you to do. And if you really do embrace this new science, which actually isn't that new, but the science of epigenetics, you will learn and understand and realize that you do have the ability to heal your body regardless of what your ailments are and regardless of how long you've been dealing with these ailments. And my goal, my job is to help you guys every step along the way, one step at a time, on how you can achieve ultimate health physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually, for those of you that do have spiritual beliefs. So, all right, guys, I really would love to hear your comments, and just to hear what your opinions are in the comments below. And if you really enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a like and a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel so you can continue to get great content. And again, I'd really like to know what you guys think, and as well as what other types of videos you would like for me to do. and what topics you would like for me to talk about. So, okay guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. As always, I really appreciate it. And remember, take care of yourself. Protect yourself physically and emotionally. And don't forget, your health is your most valuable asset. Invest in it. Bye-bye.